think I'm a little confused. I had the understanding that anytime we tried to revitalize one of these horror franchises, whether that be through a remake, a sequel, a prequel like the First Omen is, that they were supposed to be just okay. At best, they have a new perspective to offer and they are enjoyable, but for the most part, they never seem to be ideal. And so, dare I say, I think the First Omen outdoes the original. I first saw The Omen about a year and a half ago, not even with the First Omen on my radar. I didn't know they were in the process of having this film come out. It was just one of those classic horror films that I never saw before, so I watched it and for the most part really enjoyed it. I wouldn't say I have any strong attachment to the franchise itself. I never saw the sequel or anything else other than the original. And so when the First Omen came out, it wasn't necessarily the top on my list to go run and see. But I am so glad I did, because this film manages to be something so unique and special and creative, despite it still having a lot of similar tropes of a modern horror film trapped in the IP of a classic. I don't really want to talk any spoilers or specifics about this one, or even the original Omen, but what I will say is that I don't really think you need to see the original in order to see this one. It definitely will enhance some aspects of it, but it's more callbacks and specific Easter eggs, and I do use the term Easter egg specifically because there are moments of this where you feel like you are watching an MCU movie. There are name drops, specific callbacks, and for the most part, it didn't really bother me, but there are a couple scenes where it feels extremely forced, and I'm just gonna assume it's due to studio interference and them trying to set up future spin-offs or sequels based on this one. But if you ignore all of that stuff, which again isn't a lot, the core of this film really does stand on its own outside of this franchise. It takes place in Rome in the 70s, and involves nuns and the Catholic Church, which is both the recipe for a successful horror film and also an overdone trope in my opinion. So when this movie gets started, I'm not too jazzed about it because of those things. Maybe it's just because of the Conjuring universe that kind of really soured me on nuns being scary, but I think this just does go to show that it's not the content itself that is the issue when it comes to cheesy horror flicks, but it's more of how it is presented, and this movie is very tactful in the way that it introduces this horrifying universe. It doesn't rely on a lot of jump scares, even though there are moments where it does have some of those things that you expect in a horror film, but what makes this truly horrifying is the concept and the graphic nature of what happens to these characters. Once the movie gets going, and it is a slow burn at first, which I actually didn't mind the slow burn because it was a little bit more in line with horror movies from the 70s, but once we get going into the second and third act, there is imagery in this film revolving around things I have never seen on screen before. I do think most of that is due to the direction by Arkasha Stevenson, who comes out very strong with this being her directorial debut, but it just feels like there is such specific intention with the way the camera rotates around the room, how it stays focused on an actor and lets them perform the scene. These aren't just cheap scares. They are very intentionally put in there to make you feel a certain way. But honestly, I think the most successful contribution to this film is the lead actress, Nell Tiger-Free, who is a name that I have never heard of until going into this film. But she is absolutely incredible. There is one specific scene towards the end where we get this almost still shot on her, where the camera doesn't break for nearly a minute or so, and she has to completely sell us on how horrifying what she is going through is, simply on how her body is behaving. It is a shockingly physical performance that I think is just as creepy as anything within this film. She absolutely sells it, and the supporting cast is equally good, but it again all starts with this trust from the director that these actors have what it takes to execute such horror. As far as the story itself goes, for the most part, I found it fairly successful. I think if you understand the idea of The Omen or have seen the original film, what is meant to be major reveals within the plot, you might see coming. And I did pretty much predict how this film was going to end up in the third act, but I don't think this is supposed to be a major plot twisty movie. So even if you do think you know what's going to happen within this film, I don't think that hinders your experience of it. So overall, I think this is a very successful version of this trend that we've been seeing trying to revitalize old IP. The only thing holding me back on being so on board with this is the fear that they are going to milk it for so many more bad sequels. I would love to be proven wrong, but when you see the ending of this movie, you can't help but feel that's where we're heading. But if you want a very solid horror movie that really digs into the problems within religion and the desire to control power, creating something evil simply for the sake to scare people onto your side, this movie has all of that. It really does justify its existence, being a great balance of inspired franchise and original material. But I would love to hear your thoughts on The Omen, so if you've seen it, please comment below, let me know what you think, and I will see you next time.